Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Edric Show. I am your host, Edric Jerome. This is the place for intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I post content to my YouTube channel and all of my other podcast platforms. It's going to take me a minute to introduce our guest because she is so distinguished, and I want to make sure we cover just how wonderful she is and just how much of a historical, cultural jewel she is. And I mean that in every sense of the way based on the work that she's done. My guest is author Carla Kaplan. She is the Stanton W. and Elizabeth K. Davis Distinguished Professor of American Literature at Northwestern University and an award-winning biographer and cultural historian. She's here to discuss her new book, Troublemaker, The Fierce, Unruly Life of Jessica Mitford, which offers the first comprehensive look at the quote-unquote queen of muckrakers, the British aristocrat who transformed into a legendary American investigative journalist and fierce advocate for social justice. Carla's previous books include the bestsellers Miss Anne in Harlem, The White Women of the Black Renaissance, Zora Neale Hurston, A Life in Letters, and The Erotics of Talk, Women's Writing and Feminist Paradigms. In addition, Carla's work and scholarship has received some of the highest honors in the humanities, including the Guggenheim Fellowship, the National Book Endowment for the Humanities Public Scholar Fellowship, and a fellowship at the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard. Carla, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Edric Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Let's get right into it. Wow, such a fascinating character, Jessica Mitford. So, when did you first become interested in examining her life and her life story? And what were some of the aspects of her life that motivated you to want to write this book?
Thank you for that question. It's a great way to start. I had known about Jessica Mitford's work, wonderful family memoirs. I had known about her muckraking and social justice writing. I had known about The American Way of Death, which was her 1963 blockbuster breakout muckraking book. I had known that she was one of the earliest prison abolitionists in the country, and I had known that she had done really important investigative journalism on the prison industrial complex, but I hadn't known all her work. And in a funny way, I was looking for Jessica Mitford for decades and never thought I'd be lucky enough to find somebody who was actually Jessica Mitford. And what I mean by that is that I was always looking, sort of in the back of my mind, to be able to tell the story of a woman activist, a serious, committed, left-wing activist who was also incredibly funny. So this is something I just had wanted to do for decades because there's a stereotype out there. It's very common. It's so common, people take it for granted that women activists are grim and gray and over earnest and dull as dirt and really boring and always correcting you, and nobody wants to be in the room with them. And I'm an activist, and I think I'm really funny and fun to be with. And that stereotype always grated against, my sense of self. But Jessica Mitford, more than anybody I can think of, belies that stereotype because the thing that really distinguishes her life and her work is she got up every single day ready to fight the fight, just filled with energy for the fight. And she got up every single day looking for the fun. She never gave up on her right to experience joy and laughter and pranks and teasing. And it meant that everybody else wanted to be in the room with her because she was just the most fun person in the room. And I had been looking for somebody like that, somebody who did incredible social justice work, but was really fun to be around. As I say, I didn't think it would actually get to be Jessica Mitford. And then I was writing this book, which you mentioned, Miss Anne in Harlem, which was a group biography of the white women of the Black Harlem Renaissance. Talk about an unlikely trajectory, right? I mean, this was the last place this group of white women either thought they'd go or really anybody thought they could belong. And the truth is, it's mostly a story about what happens when good intentions aren't enough, as they are never enough in the history of American racism. We know that good intentions aren't enough. And here were these white women who went into Black Harlem filled with good intentions, but they didn't have a whole lot else. Maybe they had good intentions and some money. And it's mostly a story about failed allyship. And I knew as I was writing Miss Anne in Harlem, the next book had to be a story of a successful ally. I couldn't do it again. I couldn't tell another sad story of failed allies. So I was also looking for a successful ally. And then here's Jessica Mitford. I mean, you can't, I mean, there's really almost no better story of an unlikely and incredibly successful progressive ally than Mitford because she comes from so far. She comes from the British aristocracy and becomes a really significant civil rights worker in Oakland, California. And you can't make that. So that's sort of, I was looking for her even before I found her. And for everything I was looking for, she's an even better example of what I wanted than I hoped I could find.
Before I get to my next question, you said something interesting. Before I get to my next question, you said something interesting. Many of the times, these stories, as you mentioned, they're steeped in trauma, and the fight for social justice is difficult and challenging and emotionally taxing, and just it takes a lot out of people. Yes, in writing this book about Jessica Mitford, was it refreshing for you to see the humor that she maintained? Because it's almost like she needed that balance in order to do what she did.
It was more than refreshing for me. It was deeply, and it remains deeply inspiring. So she did something that I wish I could do more the way she did, which is, as I say, she got up every day with the energy for the fight. She was always ready to fight for justice, and she got up every day ready to laugh. I think most of us these days are struggling, frankly, to just get out of bed because we know the second we open our apps and we look at the New York Times, we are going to want to cry, right? I mean, the last couple of days, it's been another activist killed in Minneapolis,
Exactly.
right? Another person killed in Minnesota. So now we're at, they say five. I think the number is higher, but okay, we're getting towards half a dozen and counting. And, it's easy to sort of want to pull the covers up and just not cope and to feel dispirited. And the way Jessica Mitford kept up the fight was keeping up her spirits. She didn't keep up her spirits as a guilty pleasure. She didn't, she inspired other people to have the energy for this struggle by enjoying being with each other, working together, making a difference, finding pleasure, even in things like a dinner party or a fundraiser or a good concert. And she understood that if we're in it for the long haul, and God knows right now we are in it for the long haul, right? Nothing's going to happen quick. We see that now. That if we're in it for the long haul, we have to keep each other's spirits up. We have to keep each other's energy up. And she really understood that in a profound way. And it's why she was so beloved, I think. She was beloved across, the Bay Area and the Bay Area left. She's something of an icon. My British publisher calls her a neglected icon. In the Bay Area, I don't think she's that neglected,
No.
but it was her ability to do that work every day and to be funny and enjoy life.
What was it specifically about the Bay Area's political climate in the mid 20th century, especially Oakland and the East Bay, that had such an impact on her activism? And what extent did the local Bay Area culture provide some of the essential issues, social justice campaigns, and industries that sparked her career as an investigative journalist and social justice warrior?
I do not think Decca, as she was always known, could have been Decca anywhere but Oakland, California. And she said that. I mean, she wrote an essay, it's never been published, called Why I Choose to Live Where I Live. It's about why she loves Oakland, California. And one of the things she said is, in Oakland, there's no gray area. In Oakland, everything is out in the open. You just see the truth of a racist, classist, capitalist society in a really clear way in Oakland, California. So there was that aspect of it. There was the incredible history in Oakland of militant organizing coming from the Oakland Black community. She worked, many of the people she worked with in the Civil Rights Congress of the Communist Party were the parents of the later Black Panthers. So this was a long struggle coming out of Black Oakland, and she was part of that. But there was also in Oakland the horrible long history of police brutality, of labor discrimination, and of housing discrimination. It was very overt. So for her, everything was set in almost in bright lights. And she knew exactly what she was dealing with and what Jessica Mitford deeply believed. And it's something that was a principle of a lot of left organizing shortly thereafter she started her work, was that you had to take political leadership from the people most affected by the struggle, that you could not come in and impose upon them a vision of how they should strategize and what they should do and what their priorities should be. And in Oakland, California, she was able to both be in the Communist Party and take all of her leadership from Black community organizers. And that was critical to her. She wanted to learn from the people who were dealing with the issues she cared about. The other aspect of this, and it's not just Oakland, it's the larger Bay Area, but I don't think there's any way Jessica Mitford could have possibly stayed in the American Communist Party anywhere else. Because the thing about Jessica Mitford is she couldn't follow a rule if her life depended on it. She just was incapable of following rules or authorities or protocols. She couldn't do it. And in the Bay Area, the Communist Party was much less committed to, central leadership. It wasn't committed to the Soviet Union in the same way. It wasn't even committed to the party line in the same way. There was more playfulness, there was more creativity. The Bay Area Communist Party was its own thing. It was sui generis. There was a lot more. It had the California Labor School. It had a lot more room for both self-education, but for experimentation for somebody like Jessica Mitford, who really had to operate by her own terms. And so the Bay Area, as well as Oakland, gave her room to develop her skills. It was in the Civil Rights Congress she learned what a great investigator she was. She wrote all of the background research on all the cases of police brutality and incarceration and housing discrimination that the CRC took up for 50 years. Well, she was the investigator. So this is where she learned her chops as a journalist. And again, I'm not sure that she would have been seen so readily somewhere else. She was an oddball in Oakland, right? She was a former British aristocrat, and she kept those mannerisms, and she kept the large black handbag, and she really kept the accent. In fact, the accent got stronger every year she lived in Oakland, which is pretty funny because she knew she was using it, right? So she was a notable, no, a figure you couldn't help but notice. And in the Oakland civil rights political world, her skills were readily seen, and she was promoted about every 4 months within the Communist Party. I'm not sure that would have happened in Chicago or New York. In Chicago or New York, she might have been seen as a little more of an oddball. But we're talking about the Bay Area where room is made for oddballs. And she took advantage of that. So I think she couldn't have been who she was without that context of where she lived.
Throughout her career, she drew attention to herself. She was fearless. She spoke truth to power. She had no issues speaking her mind, openly being a member of the Communist Party, which actually brought her in front of the House on Un-American Activities Committee. Obviously there are echoes that we thought those embers had gone out, but there are echoes of that committee that have raged into this, my opinion, political flame we're seeing right now. Talk to me about how she met that committee head on, and just how she dealt with the fact, because a lot of people capitulated. A lot of people, once they started coming after him, back down. She went the other way. Talking about that.
She did. And it's really easy to misunderstand the way she dealt with HUAC and the way she dealt with the California committee, because she did deal with it particularly on the day she was called before the committee, she used humor, and it was her humor that, in fact, kept her from being jailed that very day. And I'll tell that story in a second.
Sure.
But she expected, fully expected to go to prison for years, as did her husband, Bob Truhaft, a people's lawyer who was also in the Communist Party. They had set up a series of people who would look after their kids. So they had a backup and a backup to the backup and a backup to the backup because pretty much everybody they cared about and knew was going to prison. Everybody was going to jail. So she fully expected to, and she was called before HUAC during a period when she was acting as the executive secretary of the local Bay Area and Oakland Communist Party. What this meant was she had all the records. And this is why she was subpoenaed. She had all of the membership and financial records for the local chapters that we would now call the sort of East Bay and the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
So they were calling her up and they insisted in the subpoena, you must bring the records. You have to bring the records. So she went to the courtroom. She went to the hearing with absolutely no records. She wore her best outfit. Her mother-in-law was a milliner in New York, a very famous upscale hat maker. She had one of Ivanka Truhaft's hats. So she was, she had her pearls. She did the whole thing. She was just dressed to the nines. And then she refused to answer any questions. She said she wouldn't answer a single question. So, of course, they kept pressing and they kept pressing. And at one point, they got pretty fed up with her. And they asked her if she was a member of the East Bay Tennis Club. And they only asked that because it was a ridiculously conservative, totally right-wing association. Well, she didn't hear them right. What she heard was East Bay Tenants Club.
Mm.
And so she refused to answer that either. And at the point at which she refused to answer, the entire courtroom erupted into hysterical laughter. People just went wild because she was so funny. And they were so disgusted with her, they told her to leave. They forgot to ask for the records.
Hmm.
It was her humor. She disarmed them. They weren't laughing, but they just wanted her out of there because she was cracking up the whole room. And she knew they had just forgotten to ask her for the record. So she wasn't out of the hallway before she was figuring out where she was going to hide out for a week because she knew they were going to remember and come after her, which they did. But she was hiding out for a week and they didn't find her. And so she escaped going to prison during the Red Scare by the skin of her
Mm.
very funny teeth.
One of the things that really struck me about her was the ability to combine the activism, the awareness, where she came from, all of that. But she was also a very talented writer.
Yeah.
Not just, I mean, speeches and yes, but to combine that activism with her skills as a journalist. Talk to me about, because, very few people can do that. We have people who are great activists and you might have people who are great writers, but it's kind of a rare combination to have someone, which I think makes her voice so effective.
I think you're exactly right. And by the way, I meant to ask you if you ever knew her because I know you're from the area.
I know of her, obviously. Of course, I know about her, but I never had a chance to meet her. No.
So her writing, I think, is incredibly unusual. And her writing, I think, even though some of the books have been celebrated, I think the overall writing is a little bit underappreciated for the reason you were just describing. It brings together two things we almost never see at the same moment, which is a fierce commitment to social justice and to exposing people who take advantage of others and being funny. So, she has this sort of Mark Twain ability to turn a joke at almost any moment, right? And we see that. It's almost an American style of wit and humor, but it's almost never before been married to muckraking. Muckraking is usually a sort of, make the reader cry genre, make the reader feel sorry for the little children who are working in the meat plant, for the workers who are exposed to chemicals at the oil factory, to the, working conditions of people who are doing seafood processing. It's very rarely an occasion for the reader to also laugh. And if you think about it, it's almost impossible to do these two things at once. And that was her signature. Now, it's not something she did in every book. And in fact, it was a huge issue for her. One of the things I researched and found in her archive and her correspondence and her drafts, because she kept absolutely everything, was that she struggled in some of her books with how to let the reader both get enraged. She wasn't interested in tears. She never wanted her readers to get weepy. In fact, weepiness was something Jessica Mitford could not tolerate. She called it grubbing about, and she wouldn't have anything to do with it. She didn't want to be near weepiness. She was almost never weepy. She wanted rage. So it's very hard to encourage your readers to feel rage and laughter at the same time. She needed a very particular kind of subject to pull that off. And when she was doing consumer rights advocacy of any kind, including in the medical profession, both the first book and the last book in a way, she could do that. But in her Kind and Usual Punishment, which was her prison book, her book on the prison industrial complex, she wrote letters about, oh, there's nothing funny here. What am I going to do? Am I going to lose my readers? I can't be funny about this. So she struggled with the same thing we all struggle with is, sometimes things just seem too grim for laughter. And she struggled with that too.
You mentioned the letters and papers that she left behind, which I have a question about that. I'm going to ask it now. I had it later on, but your research for this book and as well as your previous books was extensive, and I can only imagine the amount of primary source material that you had to locate and analyze and process to tell all of these important stories. Can you talk about that side of the writing process and how your approach may have evolved or changed over the years, if at all?
Oh, I wish my approach had changed. The biggest difference was digitization. So Jessica Mitford left behind roughly 600 crammed banker's boxes of material. And I wouldn't have room for that. My house isn't big enough for that, but I was able to digitize a lot of that material. I am unfortunately, however, completely old school as a biographer, which is to say, I follow the Robert Caro rule that you have to turn every page, you have to look at every document. Because even if the whole box says financial records, there could be something incredible in those financial records that, a check she got from an unlikely source, a check she refused, a payment she made, a payment she received. I found it necessary to go through absolutely everything, and I wanted to put her in the largest context I could. So I tried to research all the topics that mattered to her and to look at their changing trajectory and their histories over time, and to research the people who were closest to her as well, so that I could understand her relationships with them, her correspondence. I ended up having to learn more than I ever thought I would or wanted to about the British aristocracy and the English class system to try to create that context for her. And that was a lot of why the book took 10 years, because there was just so much material to go through. But all of that is what nerds like me like doing. And I'm a research nerd. Let me just admit that. I love going through those boxes. I like to be in a dusty, unair conditioned archive. I just thrive on that stuff. What was hardest for me, actually, about Jessica Mitford was trying to understand somebody who was so reluctant to ever talk about her own feelings, who, in fact, made it a point never to talk about her own feelings. She thought that was self-indulgent. She considered it a particularly American failing, this concentration we have on our own feelings. She almost never talked about her own pain, and she suffered terrible tragedies, any number of them throughout her life, from the death of her first husband to the loss of two children and the loss of her sisters, which was a loss she mourned up until the very day she died. She missed that sisterhood, that savage little tribe, as they were called by their neighbors. She had a great deal of sadness and loss in her life, which may be behind some of the humor. And she didn't want to talk about it. She left very little behind about it. Fortunately, there were some letters to her closest confidants, but it took me a long time to get to know somebody like that because I'm an American. I'm used to talking about my feelings. Jessica Mitford called it grubbing about. She wanted no part of it. I grub about all the time. I grub about at the drop of a hat. Give me a chance, I'll grub about. And so that was the part of her that took me longest to understand, I think.
Quick aside, one of my favorite places in the world is the Bancroft Library on the campus of UC
Mm.
Berkeley.
Yeah.
I love being up there and going through all that. Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. It's so much that you find when you're doing research like that relevant today.
Nerd's
Um,
paradise, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So shout out to the Bancroft Library on the
Thank you.
campus
Yes.
of UC Berkeley. Talk to me now, just as I've got a few minutes left. But you're 10 years, you're getting close to the end, and you write that last word of this book, and you step back. One, what were some of your immediate thoughts? What did you go through after writing the book? And two, what do you want people to take away after they read this book?
There was no way for me to know or predict that I would finish a book about a lifelong anti-fascist and anti-authoritarian just at this moment. Just at this moment as we were being dragged backwards into fascism.
Yep.
Who knew? So that to me was very top of mind, that here was somebody who lived through a moment of fascism even more difficult than the one we've hit. We may get there, but her moment was even worse, and survived it and lived through it and fought it, and gives us a kind of a model for hoping to get to the other side of it. I never expected that that would be the case. But the other thing that really struck me is how much we could use Jessica Mitford right now. Every day I think, oh, we need Decca, because what she had a genius was for mocking authoritarian figures in a way that empowered people to resist them. She knew that part of the way you have to encourage resistance is, on the one hand, you take tyranny very, very seriously. You take it deadly seriously. And on the other hand, you recognize that tyrants are human and they can be mocked and they can be taken down. And she had both. And she was very, very funny about people she wanted to take down. And we could use that. I mean, there are, some people who have been doing that, some people who have been losing their jobs for doing that,
Absolutely.
right? But I keep thinking about how much we could use her now. What I would love people to take from this is, I guess let me just say what I've been able to take from this is the importance of keeping up all of our spirits if we're going to keep up the fight. That she is a constant reminder to me that I can't give way to my own versions of grubbing about my sense of desperation or depression or wallowing or despair. First of all, I don't have the right to that. I'm not going to some horrible prison in another country, so I better not be focusing on my own problems. But also, for all of us, we're not going to get through this unless we can keep one another's spirits up. And she reminds us of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Carla, again, I was really looking forward to our conversation. Your work and your scholarship speaks for itself. I'm so happy you came on the show today. If people want more information about you or the book or Jessica Mitford or just things in general that interest you, where can they go to find more information about you and the book?
Thank you. They can go to my website, which is just www.carlakaplan.com, or they can go to www.jessicamitford.com, which is a website I share with Peter Sussman, the Bay Area editor of all of Jessica Mitford's letters, and it'll direct you to his book or my book. We call it Life and Letters. We think that's very funny. We're not as funny as Jessica Mitford. So either website will give you much more information.
If you indulge me, one more question. What's next after finishing this book? What's the next, if you can share, or what's interesting you now?
Thank you for asking. And I'm toying with a project I don't know. It's very, very early days, but it would be a group biography of a number of women who resisted. But I would not try to do another cradle to grave. It would be very select years, just 4 or 5 years that I want to cover so that we can look at a group resistance at a very, very specific and particular moment, having done, the whole sort of long span of somebody's life. And I'm also doing two new Zora Neale Hurston projects.
Nice.
Doing a
Nice.
short book on Hurston, and it's a book on why she matters 100 years later and why Hurston is so important for us to keep reading. And then I'm doing a new anthology of Hurston essays with the wonderful Black feminist critic at Princeton, Autumn Womack. And Autumn and I are going to put together a new collection of Hurston essays. It's an important time to take another look at Hurston. So we're going to try to bring her back into the light a little more.
Absolutely. We need historians like you more than ever these days so that you can remind us how the past affects where we're headed. And maybe there's some ways we can, address some of the issues that are very challenging for our times today. So Carla Kaplan, author of the new book, Troublemaker, The Fierce, Unruly Life of Jessica Mitford. Thank you so much for coming on the Edric Show. I really appreciate your time and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. This has been another edition of the Edric Show. As promised, intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I post content to my YouTube channel and all of the podcast platforms where you can find the Edric Show. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode.